Her husband mocked her for being just a housewife. What happened at the gala stunned everyone. The embossed envelope arrived in the morning mail, nestled among the bills and junk flyers. Hannah held it with mild surprise, brushing flour off her hands as she read the sender, Salvest and Finch Corporation. She hesitated before opening it, already guessing what it was. Her husband Gregory's company hosted a lavish annual gala every spring, an event he often attended alone, claiming it was no place for someone without business credentials. But this time, her name was printed alongside his. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake. When Gregory returned that evening, she showed him the invitation. His reaction was far from enthusiastic. "Oh, they probably just auto-included spouses this year," he said dismissively, tossing his keys into the bowl by the door. "Don't get your hopes up. It's not exactly a tea party." Hannah laughed awkwardly, brushing off the sting in his tone. She wasn't new to his sharp edges, but something in her stirred curiosity maybe, or a small spark of rebellion. If they invited her, she had the right to go. She pressed the invitation to the fridge door with a magnet and returned to the soup on the stove, the silence thick between them. The night of the gala, Hannah sat quietly in the passenger seat of their sleek black car, her hands folded tightly over her lap. Gregory drove with one hand, tapping the steering wheel with the other, glancing at her occasionally through the corners of his eyes. "You could have worn something simpler," he said flatly, gesturing at her soft blue dress. "It's a business event, not prom night." She swallowed hard and turned to the window, blinking rapidly. She had spent hours choosing something elegant but understated. Apparently, none of it mattered. As they pulled up to the Grand Hotel entrance, Gregory sighed audibly. "Just try not to talk too much about, your home life stuff," he muttered. "The people there are sharp, investors, partners. It's best not to embarrass either of us." His words landed like ice on her chest. Hannah nodded, clutching her purse tighter. She had no intention of stealing his spotlight. As they stepped out of the car and onto the marble steps, flashbulbs popped from nearby photographers. Gregory straightened his tie, smiled at the cameras, and walked ahead without waiting. Hannah followed silently, her heels clicking like a quiet protest behind him. Long before the uncomfortable glitz of corporate events and expensive dresses she never chose, Hannah had lived a different life. Back in her 20s, she had been a rising star in architectural design, known for her bold lines and human-centric concepts. Her professors called her sketches visionary. Her favorite project, an open-air wellness center designed for underserved neighborhoods, had nearly landed her a prestigious apprenticeship. She had been on fire, ready to leave her mark on the world. Then came Gregory. He was charming and ambitious, just promoted to a junior executive role at a promising firm. He had taken interest in her with the intensity of a man who knew how to win. Their relationship moved fast, and somewhere between his subtle disapproval of her idealistic designs and the long nights she spent helping him prepare presentations, her own portfolio began to gather dust. When they married, she packed away her drafting tools and told herself that family life was a different kind of architecture. Over time, she began to forget how it felt to create something that was hers alone. At the gala, the room shimmered with light and noise, full of laughter, polished shoes, and clinking glasses. Gregory moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands and flashing his signature smile. Hannah trailed behind him like a misplaced handbag. He introduced her without flourish, adding little more than her name before shifting the conversation back to himself. At one point, when a senior director asked what she did, Gregory laughed and answered for her. "She manages the house, logistics, laundry, the usual." "My secret weapon, right?" He winked, and the table chuckled politely. Hannah smiled faintly, her cheeks burning. She tried to sip her champagne, but her hand trembled slightly. Throughout the evening, she noticed the women around her, all sharply dressed, their conversations peppered with phrases like mergers, rounds of funding, and European expansions. She felt like she had stumbled into someone else's play, handed the wrong script. Still, she kept her composure, smiled when expected, and nodded along. When Gregory leaned in and whispered, "Don't touch anything on the dessert table, it's for the VIPs," she stared at him blankly, wondering when exactly her dignity became optional. Dinner was served in a ballroom the size of a cathedral, with long tables draped in white linens and golden candelabras glowing like stars above. Gregory sat among the board members and their spouses, his confidence growing with each compliment thrown his way. As the main course was served, he raised a glass and shared an anecdote about their domestic dynamic. "Hannah once tried to balance our budget using color-coded envelopes. She even labeled one emotional emergencies," he said, chuckling as others followed suit. "That's when I realized finance really isn't her thing." The laughter was sharper this time, tinged with mockery. Hannah's throat tightened. She smiled weakly, pushing the roast chicken around her plate. The woman beside her leaned over and said, "You're very lucky. Gregory's name is everywhere these days." Hannah nodded, too tired to explain how behind every award he received was a home life managed quietly, invisibly, without complaint. When dessert arrived, Gregory didn't offer her a taste. Instead, he turned to the man on his right and asked, "Can you imagine trying to run a business with someone who's never stepped inside an office?" Hannah's heart sank. She glanced at the ornate ceiling above and wished she could disappear into it. After Gregory's latest joke at her expense, Hannah noticed the subtle glances from other guests, eyebrows raised, lips curled in amusement, eyes darting between her and her husband. Whispers trailed in the air like smoke, faint but unmistakably about her. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It was a peculiar kind of invisibility, to be surrounded by people and yet reduced to background noise, spoken of as though she were not present. Each giggle tightened something in her chest, yet she said nothing, her silence a shield she had learned to wield. Later, in the ladies' room, she overheard two women near the mirror. "She's the one Gregory brought," one said, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Thought she'd be more polished. I assumed she'd at least have her own career." The other laughed and reapplied her lipstick. "Maybe she's one of those vintage wives. You know, homemade jam, Etsy crafts, and yoga at noon." They exited before Hannah could react, but their words echoed louder than the ballroom's music. She stared at her reflection for a long moment, not out of vanity, but to search for the woman they had mocked. The one she no longer recognized. Back at home, Hannah sat alone in the dark kitchen, her dress still clinging to her like a shell. The gala's glitter had faded into a weight she couldn't quite lift. Gregory had gone straight to bed, mumbling about an early meeting. She opened a kitchen drawer and pulled out a sketchbook she hadn't touched in years. The pages were yellowed, the lines smudged, but her designs still breathed. There were notes in the margins, ideas once filled with hope, plans for buildings meant to heal, inspire, connect. As she flipped through the pages, she felt a strange mixture of grief and longing. How easily she had let it go, the world she once loved. And for what? A life where even her presence was met with irritation or ridicule. Gregory had never discouraged her outright, it had been death by suggestion, 1,000 quiet jabs. "It's sweet you have a hobby," he would say, or, "Your time's better spent helping with the kids' school forms." Over time, those comments rooted themselves inside her. But tonight, as she looked at her own forgotten work, something inside her stirred. Perhaps not everything was lost. The bedroom was cold when Hannah entered, the silk of her dress rustling softly as she moved. Gregory lay facing the wall, already half asleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, watching his back, her mind still tangled in the conversations she had endured. "You could have helped me out more," he said suddenly, his voice thick with fatigue. "You looked stiff. People notice that sort of thing." She didn't answer. The idea that she had embarrassed him simply by existing silently among his peers was too cruel to process. He turned briefly, eyes half open, and added, "Next time, just let me know if you're not comfortable going. It's better for both of us." Then he rolled away again, pulling the covers up to his chin. Hannah didn't move. Her hands lay still in her lap, her heart pulsing with quiet defiance. Somewhere between his words, she realized something important. She had not been invited for who she was. She had been expected to be decorative, agreeable, quiet. But something inside her refused to keep shrinking. Not again. The next morning, Hannah stood in the kitchen, watching steam curl from her teacup as sunlight painted stripes on the table. She tried to ground herself in the routine, kettle boiling, toast browning, drawer opening to reveal the good china. But as she reached for her favorite cup, a delicate one with pale lavender trim, it slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The sound startled her, loud and sharp, like a crack through the quiet spell she'd been living under. She stared at the fragments for a long time, unsure if she felt sadness or relief. The cup had been a gift from her mother, years ago, something she always used when she needed comfort. Yet, in its destruction, she sensed a strange metaphor. Things didn't break because they were weak, they broke when they were mishandled, undervalued. Kneeling to pick up the pieces, she thought, maybe she had allowed too much for too long. Maybe this was her sign. Not a loss, but the start of something new. Later that afternoon, driven by an urge she couldn't explain, Hannah climbed into the attic. The air was dusty and stale, filled with the scent of cardboard and old cedar. She sifted through boxes marked with old dates and names, holiday decorations, baby clothes, forgotten wedding gifts. One box was labeled college. Inside, beneath worn notebooks and faded course schedules, she found a sealed envelope, still crisp despite the years. Her name was scrawled on the front in familiar handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was a letter from Professor Valenti, her mentor in university. The message inside was warm, congratulatory, and, most shocking of all, a formal offer for a junior position at an international design firm. She gasped, reading the date. This letter had arrived just a week after her engagement to Gregory. She never remembered seeing it. It dawned on her slowly, painfully, he must have hidden it. Tears welled in her eyes as the realization settled. Her life hadn't just drifted away from her dreams. It had been steered away by someone who had claimed to love her. That evening, Hannah brought the old sketchbooks and design drafts down from the attic. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened each one. Dust clung to the edges, but the lines inside remained vivid, filled with ambition and care. She ran her hand across a page featuring an open-air community center, imagining how it would have looked finished. The lines felt alive again. As she flipped through more pages, she saw a version of herself she had almost forgotten, confident, curious, bold. The woman who had once believed she could build things that mattered. With a sudden burst of clarity, she cleared the dining table and spread her work out across its length. For the first time in years, she wasn't preparing meals or balancing household tasks, she was building again. She spent hours rearranging layouts, rewriting notes, digitizing sketches on her old tablet. Outside, the world dimmed into night, but inside, something began to brighten. The weight in her chest lessened slightly as her vision sharpened. She wasn't ready to tell anyone. Not yet. But she had found her voice again, and it came in the form of graphite, grids, and lines. 2 days later, while Gregory was away at a conference, Hannah sat at her computer, staring at the blinking cursor on an online submission form. A regional architectural society had opened its annual competition for design concepts in public revitalization. Her heart pounded as she uploaded a refined version of her old project and typed in her new pseudonym, H.S. Graft. It was a combination of her maiden name and a childhood nickname. She hesitated only once before clicking submit. For the first time in years, she was taking a step forward on her own. When the confirmation email arrived, a smile tugged at her lips. She had told no one, not Gregory, not the kids, not even her best friend from college, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. It was hers and hers alone. A secret seed planted in silence. That night, as she prepared dinner, Gregory commented on how cheerful she seemed. "Must have found a new cleaning spray you like," he joked, not looking up from his phone. Hannah said nothing, but inside, she was miles away, building something he couldn't see, couldn't control, and wouldn't understand. One morning, the toast burned in the oven while Hannah was adjusting lines on a blueprint. Gregory entered the kitchen, sniffed the air, and frowned. "Seriously? What's so hard about making toast?" he said, his voice full of disdain. She apologized softly, but it didn't stop him. "You're home all day. How do you even mess that up?" His tone was sharper than usual. "Sometimes I wonder if you actually do anything meaningful anymore," he added with a dry laugh. The words hit like slaps, unnecessary, deliberate, designed to wound. Hannah clenched the edge of the countertop. Once, those comments would have broken her, sending her into spirals of guilt and silence. But this time, something inside her held firm. She cleaned the mess without another word, her mind elsewhere, on the email update she had received that morning. Her project had passed the first round of selection. While Gregory mocked her over scorched bread, a panel of judges had seen potential in her vision. For the first time, his insults felt like background noise. They couldn't touch what was quietly growing inside her. Later that week, Hannah reached out to Mia, a former classmate and friend from her design school days. Mia had always been bold, opinionated, and relentless in her pursuit of meaningful architecture. They hadn't spoken in years, but Hannah typed the message carefully, unsure of what to expect. To her surprise, Mia responded within minutes. "Hannah? Wow. I've thought about you so many times. Where have you been hiding?" They agreed to meet at a cafe downtown that Friday. Hannah felt a tingle of nervousness she hadn't felt in ages. When they met, it was as if no time had passed. Mia was still sharp and fiery, now managing a small urban design firm with a focus on sustainable communities. Over coffee, Hannah hesitantly pulled out a few sketches and ideas. Mia's eyes widened with admiration. "These are beautiful. And they're relevant. This work could really go somewhere," she said. Hannah blinked, overwhelmed. "Do you think I could actually still do this?" Mia leaned forward, serious now. "Not only can you do it, you have to. The world needs more voices like yours. Come by the office next week. Let's talk seriously." The following Monday, Hannah entered Mia's firm for the first time. The office was small but vibrant, white boards covered in sketches, houseplants hanging in corners, the quiet hum of conversation and creativity. Mia introduced her to the team simply as a brilliant former peer with a unique perspective. Hannah tried to hide her nervousness, but inside, she was glowing. She hadn't been called brilliant in years. They showed her a few ongoing projects and asked if she'd be willing to consult on a community park design. Just initial input, Mia said. No pressure. Hannah reviewed the drafts that night at home, her heart racing with possibility. She saw flaws and opportunities, ways to enhance flow, make better use of green space, add interactive elements for families. Her notes spilled over page after page. When she returned them to Mia the next day, the entire team was impressed. This is more than input, one of the junior designers said. This is direction. Hannah smiled, trying to hide the tears welling up in her eyes. After years of being dismissed, reduced, and silenced, she was finally being heard. As the weeks passed, Hannah's presence at Mia's firm became more frequent. She wasn't officially employed, but her input was now essential in multiple projects. She arrived early, stayed late, and felt a joy in her bones she hadn't felt in over a decade. Every sketch, every solution she suggested, was met with enthusiasm. At home, she maintained her calm facade. Gregory noticed her leaving more often but never bothered to ask where she went. He assumed it was a new hobby group or one of those book clubs she'd occasionally mentioned but never joined. In truth, Hannah was no longer waiting for anyone's permission to matter. One evening, she received a message from the architecture competition committee. Her submission had reached the final round. Her hands trembled as she read the words again and again. No one knew it was her. Under the pseudonym H.S. Graft, she had quietly climbed the ladder of recognition. In the silence of her study, she allowed herself a rare moment of pride. These weren't just small victories, they were pieces of her soul returning home. One Tuesday morning, as Hannah reviewed concept boards in the firm's workspace, Mia entered holding her phone, eyes wide with disbelief. Hannah, she said in a hushed voice, Mirabelle Technologies just called. They saw the design under your pseudonym in the competition's shortlist. They want a private presentation. Hannah's jaw dropped. Mirabelle was one of the country's most forward-thinking innovation labs. Wait, they want me? Mia smiled. They don't know who you are yet. But they know the design. And they want to fund it. The meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks. Hannah barely slept during that time. She refined her presentation, designed mock-ups, and built a full virtual model of the project. She didn't tell Gregory. He had long stopped being interested in her days. When he asked why she seemed tired lately, she simply replied, just doing some reading. He nodded absently, already on his way to another golf meeting or business dinner. Hannah knew she couldn't afford to let him know, not yet. This part of her life had to remain untouched. Hannah now lived between two worlds. By day, she worked quietly at Mia's firm and prepared for her biggest opportunity yet. By night, she returned home to the cold routines of domestic duty, smiling politely while Gregory rambled about office politics and market trends. He never noticed the glow in her eyes or the silent urgency in her movements. He was too absorbed in his own ambition to see hers quietly unfolding beside him. It was ironic, really, his desire to keep her invisible had made it easier for her to move freely. Some nights, Hannah stayed up sketching until dawn, then reset the table and prepared breakfast as if nothing had happened. She felt exhausted but alive. Her children, now teenagers, began to notice a change. "You look happy lately," her daughter said once, cautiously. "Are you doing something fun?" Hannah kissed her forehead and replied, "Just rediscovering something I used to love." It was the truth, even if the full story remained her own. One evening, Gregory arrived home in a rare state of elation. He poured himself a scotch and gestured for Hannah to sit. "Big news," he said. "I've been named Vice President of Strategy. It's going to be announced at the next gala." Hannah smiled politely and offered a congratulatory toast. "You'll be coming, of course," he added, barely looking at her. "This time, you'll need to step it up a bit. It's going to be a media-heavy event." The words stung more than he realized. He began detailing the guest list: board members, press, several politicians, even a few tech executives from Mirabel Technologies. Hannah froze for half a second, masking her reaction quickly. The name rang like thunder in her mind. That would be the same week as her private presentation. She kept her face neutral, her voice steady. "Of course, I'll be there," she replied. But deep inside, she knew this time, she would not just be attending as Gregory's silent ornament. Her presence would carry weight far greater than he could imagine. In the days leading to the gala and the Mirabel presentation, tension settled in the walls of their home. Gregory, sensing a shift he couldn't explain, began acting colder. "Why are you always out lately?" he asked one evening. "Don't tell me it's still that cookbook club." Hannah paused mid-step, choosing her words carefully. "I've been exploring design again. Just as a side thing." He laughed, shaking his head. "You always did love those artsy distractions. Just don't forget where the real value is. I carry this household." Hannah didn't respond. She stared at his reflection in the hallway mirror as he walked past her, adjusting his tie. The man she once admired looked smaller now, bloated with pride, dulled by years of entitlement. She thought of the room she'd be standing in soon, surrounded by people who would know her only by her work, not by who she was married to. For so long, she had defined herself by what she supported. Now, she was ready to be something entirely separate. The cracks in the mirror were no longer flaws, they were beginnings. The morning of the Mirabel presentation, Hannah woke before sunrise. She sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence, her fingers trembling slightly. Her pitch materials were packed in a crisp leather folder. Across town, Mia waited to pick her up. Hannah left a note for Gregory, claiming she had errands and would be back by evening. It was easier to be vague than to explain something he wouldn't believe in. She looked at her reflection one last time, no longer unsure, no longer apologizing for her ambition. At the Mirabel headquarters, the room was smaller than she imagined but full of quiet tension. 3 directors sat at a long table, reviewing her submission. Hannah stood before them, poised and calm, as she unfolded her vision for a modular, green integrated space for education and wellness. She spoke not just of structures but of people, of connection, dignity, restoration. As she finished, the room fell silent for a moment. Then one of the directors leaned forward and said, "We'd like to partner with you. This could be a national model." Hannah nodded slowly. Inside, her heart thundered. That evening, Hannah returned home to find Gregory waiting in the living room, arms crossed. "You've been gone all day," he said flatly. "I had meetings," she replied simply. "Meetings? With who? The neighborhood gardening club?" His voice carried that familiar condescension. She didn't reply. He scoffed and waved her off. "Fine. Just don't forget the galas in 3 days. And try not to embarrass me this time." No floral prints or awkward silences. Hannah smiled softly, not from amusement but from clarity. He still saw her as an extension of his image, something to position and polish for show. He had no idea who she truly was, or what she had achieved. And that was no longer her problem. She excused herself, went upstairs, and opened her laptop. The Mirabelle project was now official. She had been asked to give a public acknowledgement under her real name at a launch event that just happened to be scheduled during the gala. It was poetic. And she would not miss it. 2 nights before the gala, Hannah stood by the window in her study, gazing at the streetlights below. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the dishwasher. She felt the weight of years pressing down, years of silence, compromise, and slow erasure. But she also felt something else, momentum. She picked up the phone and called Mia. "I've decided," she said, her voice low but certain. "I'm going to the gala. But I'm also going to the Mirabelle launch. And I'm going to tell them who H.S. Graft really is." Mia was silent for a moment, then replied, "Good. You've spent long enough hiding. The world should know." Hannah nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. She wasn't crying from fear, but from the realization that the life she had accepted was finally dissolving. The woman who had once been too afraid to speak was now preparing to stand on 2 stages, one as someone's wife, and one as someone of her own making. She would no longer live in the dark. Not even for comfort. The day before the gala, news broke across design publications. Mirabelle Technologies was launching a revolutionary new wellness complex designed by newcomer Hannah S. Graft. The announcement included a photo, Hannah standing beside her modular model, eyes bright, posture strong. Gregory, sitting in his office, scrolled past the article, not realizing who it was. Only when a colleague emailed him a link, adding "Isn't this your wife?" did he stop and blink. For a long time, he stared at the screen. Then he closed the browser without saying a word. That night at dinner, he was strangely quiet. Hannah noticed, but said nothing. When he finally spoke, it was forced and shallow. "Big day tomorrow," he muttered. "Don't forget to be ready by 6. I want us to arrive before the press." Hannah nodded. Of course. He still hadn't connected the dots, and she didn't bother to help him. She had no interest in softening the truth. It would arrive on its own, and when it did, it would speak louder than anything she could say. The evening of the gala, Hannah chose her dress carefully. It was black, simple, tailored perfectly to her frame. Elegant, but commanding. When Gregory saw her, he raised an eyebrow. "You look different," he said. "In a good way, I mean. More confident or something." She didn't reply. They drove to the venue in silence. At the entrance, cameras flashed, and Gregory smiled broadly for them. Hannah stood beside him, poised and unreadable. Inside, the ballroom was crowded with executives, shareholders, and influencers. As the evening unfolded, the MC called out the evening's highlights. "And now," he said, "we have a very special mention. Mirabelle Technologies, one of our proudest regional partners, has unveiled a groundbreaking project." Gregory leaned forward, curious. The project was designed by a rising visionary, someone local, someone in this very room. The spotlight swept across the room before resting on Hannah. The room hushed. "Please welcome the designer of the Mirabelle Wellness Initiative, Hannah S. Graft." The silence was absolute. Gregory turned slowly, his face pale, as his wife stepped forward, her head held high. As Hannah stepped onto the stage, all eyes followed her graceful, deliberate walk. The room, loud just moments before, fell into stunned silence. Behind her, the screen projected her name beside the Mirabelle Technologies logo. One of the directors met her at the podium with a handshake and a proud smile. "It's an honor to meet the mind behind the design," he said warmly. Gregory stood near the front table, frozen. The woman he had dismissed for years was now being celebrated by the very world he tried to dominate. At the microphone, Hannah's voice was steady and composed. "For a long time, I stopped drawing. I stopped believing I had a voice outside my home. I became invisible, not because I wanted to be, but because it was easier than being dismissed. This project reminded me that silence isn't humility. Sometimes, it's fear." Her words settled into the crowd like quiet thunder. She didn't need to call out Gregory. His shame was written across his face as clearly as her name was on the screen. The applause that followed her speech was thunderous and sustained. People stood. Some approached the stage to shake her hand. One of the board members leaned toward another and whispered, "Wasn't she that guy Gregory's wife? I thought she just stayed home." Gregory remained near the back, trying to smile, but his face was pale and strained. He attempted to approach her after the speech, but she was quickly surrounded by people offering praise, business cards, and congratulations. Whispers swirled around him, guests recalling how he often joked about his wife's quiet lifestyle. Now, the very same woman had just stunned a room full of executives with a visionary design that would change urban wellness infrastructure. Gregory stood there, slowly realizing that he had never really known who she was. She had never needed him to succeed. She had only needed space. And now she had claimed it, with the world watching. In a desperate attempt to regain some connection to the spotlight, Gregory approached one of the Mirabelle directors. "Yes, well, she's my wife," he said with a shallow chuckle, trying to sound proud. The director gave him a brief, polite smile. "She certainly made an impression tonight," he replied, then turned away to speak with someone else. Gregory's grin faded. The power he once held in introducing her as just a housewife had dissolved into something pathetic. Later, he finally managed to speak to Hannah alone near the courtroom. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice sounded wounded, as if he were the one betrayed. She looked at him, composed. "Because you never asked," she said simply. "And when I tried, you made it clear I wasn't worth listening to." He had no retort. Her answer wasn't cruel, it was just honest. And for a man who thrived on control, honesty was the most unsettling thing of all. When the event ended, Hannah stepped outside into the cool night air. People still whispered her name behind her as she walked. Flashbulbs went off, but she didn't stop for interviews. She didn't need to. Her message had already been delivered. Mia waited by the car with a wide grin. "You did it," she said. Hannah nodded, not with arrogance, but with peace. "No," she replied. "I remembered who I was. That's all." It wasn't about revenge. It was about returning to herself. Back at home, Gregory arrived later, silent. He didn't speak a word as he loosened his tie and sat at the edge of the bed. Hannah remained in the doorway. "There's no going back," she said quietly. "I'm moving forward now. You should, too." He didn't argue. He knew he had no footing left. And she wasn't asking for a fight. She was offering freedom, his and hers. But only one of them would know what to do with it. A year later, Hannah stood in the sunlit office of her new design studio. Her name was on the glass door. Her firm had already secured 2 city contracts and was in talks for a national housing initiative. She worked not to impress, but to inspire, especially younger women who had been told they were too domestic or emotional to lead. Her life was full, but finally by her own design. Her children often visited and spoke of her with pride. "I didn't know you were this amazing," her daughter said one day. Hannah smiled and replied, "Neither did I." Not for a long time. Gregory now worked at a mid-level consultancy firm, far from the top floors he once imagined for himself. Every so often, he saw Hannah's name in magazines or architectural publications and looked away. Not out of resentment, but regret. Regret for never seeing her potential, and for mistaking silence for insignificance. But Hannah didn't look back. She walked forward into each day with quiet strength and clear vision, finally the architect not just of buildings, but of her own life.